Hey everyone, what's up? So I see all the talk about Jermell Charlo and Keith Thurman and whatever else, the usual suspects, the PBC fighters. I always stated this when I was covering the Sean Porters and the Spence fights and everything else. I was trying to tell you guys back then, and people are finally catching up to the reality of the situation. People, they thought Al Haymon was such this great promoter. You know, it's kind of like the Tom Brady versus Belichick argument. Who really made who? You know what I'm saying? You can argue both ways, but in this case, uh, people will argue that Tom Brady's a system quarterback. It is what it is. I agree with that. But I mean, he did have some great attributes and some assistants, according to his own mouth, that his wife was a witch and did rituals and whatever else. But that's neither here nor there, although that movie Him just came out and they kind of expose this. But, Floyd Mayweather made Al Haymon. Al Haymon at one point had the biggest stable of fighters. None of these guys got the fight. Only select few, for the most part, got the fight and got opportunities. You know what I'm saying? And it was a very effeminate system. On top of that, Al Haymon was also utilizing political interests, partisan interests with his fighters. This is why you saw guys like Deontay Wilder coming out saying that they wanted to be pregnant. This is why you saw guys like, what's his name? Danny Garcia's talking about mental illness, awareness, and crap like that. Keith Thurman was another weird, strange character. He's a hippie, likes to play on his flute, looks like he belongs in San Francisco. But regardless of all that, they were playing the cards that they played. They got busted in a lot of money laundering schemes, especially when it came to selling tickets, things like that. The trust fund that Al Haymon was given, he ran through that money like nothing, which pretty much means he more than likely pocketed a majority of it, But at the same token, you saw that all these fighters at one point, huge stable of fighters. Where were these guys, and when were they fighting? You know what I'm saying? You barely saw a handful of those guys actually stay active and busy. And being, again, an effeminate system that he brought up, he was doing things like at 147 where he was only allowing his guys to fight for belts. Sean Porter is a two-time champ, and he had around a 10 or 11-year career. You know what I'm saying? But look at all the opportunities he got to fight for belts. So you were only successful a couple times, And we'll sit here and we'll look at a guy like Carl Froch, for example, and people swearing up and down that Carl Froch is not that good and everything else, which I never understood. I hold Carl Froch above Joe Calzaghe, but that's a whole different argument there. People are just not going to agree with me because, again, they want to praise and worship Joe Calzaghe, you know what I'm saying? But Carl Froch was over here on the front lines in the battlefield, and this man fought everybody. Carl Froch is one of my favorite fighters. And unlike a Sean Porter and whoever else, this man was a 5-time champion. It just goes to show you that people, their standards and how they're so different when comparing different fighters. Race plays into that and whatever else, your bias, if a guy shares the same skin color with you. But Carl Froch was always my dude, you know what I'm saying? He definitely overachieved, and he just showed you what hard work can do. He was a very hard worker, very dedicated fighter, and he takes a lot of heat, you know what I'm saying? People still to this day, they hate Carl Froch, and I'm just like, how could you hate this guy? This guy is the man. You know what I'm saying? Let him brag about his 80,000, fans at the stadium. Carl Froch is that dude. I don't care what anybody says, but he was a 5-time champ. And we're comparing him against guys like Sean Porter, who had all these opportunities again, and were only able to succeed like 2 times, over a decade. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is in that regard. But you now see today that Jermell Charlo, and even after Terrence Crawford beat Spence, you saw how Thurman just appeared out of nowhere, acting like him and Crawford are buddies, and he was begging for the fight then. And now you see these guys, Danny and all of them, they know what time it is. They want that payday, and this is how they've been groomed to be as fighters. Danny Garcia is another one. Before, after Floyd, we'll just say that. PBC was trying to build the next Floyd Mayweather. Broner, well, they had Berto, but Berto, of course, fell short back in the day. That was one of Al Haymon's first fighters. You know what I'm saying? Vernon Forrest was one of the first fighters as well. And I liked Vernon Forrest, you know what I'm saying? He was a very good fighter. But, tall, lanky, I just liked his style. He had that old school type approach, that little lankiness, but straight punching. I loved to watch his fights back in the day. He did come across Mayorga, whatever. But this is what happens. I'll start babbling and I'll just be going from subject to subject. But, after Broner, when that experiment failed to become the next Floyd Mayweather, you know what I'm saying? The next guy that was actually brought up was Danny Garcia. And this is where you saw the whole PBC campaign of, hey, this is on free TV. You don't have to pay for it. And Danny Garcia was the featured fighter. Now, Danny Garcia ended up being what I call a $2 whore. You know what I'm saying? He started being passed around to the Porters, to the Thurmans, and to the Spence. Another thing about these fighters is they all have a crab in a bucket type mindset. You know what I'm saying? They're happy about being, they're temporary being on top of the crab bucket, but in a crab bucket, if you pay attention to how crabs are, they're constantly trying to grab one another and pull each other down. So even when you do make it on top, you're not really accomplishing anything. You know what I'm saying? And you people, you love their personalities. You guys love to hear Keith Thurman talk with his gibberish and nonsense. Sean Porter, luckily for him, he's not in these positions like these Charlos and these Keith Thurmans who are begging for fights today and begging for attention and everything else. Sean Porter did exactly what he needed to. He used the sport of boxing, to kind of secure his life and, family and whatever else. And, he still can commentate. He's working here with DAZN and whenever they employ him and things like that. He has his own podcast, you understand. Sean Porter is a hard worker. I can't hate nothing on Sean Porter, but he used to play these crab in the bucket games too, and it was because he was with Al Haymon. But, everybody's getting on the Jermell Charlos and, his older brother, they're twins, but, Jamal Charlo and even Deontay Wilder, but Broner, I feel sorry for all these guys, even to Gervonta Tank Davis, man. These are all fighters that were brought up in an effeminate system. They were spoiled. They were given silk sheets before they were even put in a position to earn belts. They were given belts, you understand? And it got to the complacentness. We brought up Carl Froch again. Carl Froch is a guy who didn't let opportunity slip by, and he still challenged himself. He still fought big names. You know what I'm saying? He was all about the smoke, man. Arthur Abraham is a very good fight. If you guys watched that, he became more skilled, and it was his preparation that won him that fight. Many people were counting Carl Froch out of the game, you know what I'm saying? But if you watch that fight, you watch how he boxed. He boxed brilliantly. He kept discipline the whole time, and he's a guy that's not known for defense, you know what I'm saying, or skills. But it was just an amazing fight to watch. But, these guys, Keith Thurman, and we talk about complacency. Even, Jermell today, before the Canelo fight, did a little interview where he was driving in his car and talking about how he's all good, and now he's here crying and begging for a fight. And it's all having to do with the system that they were brought up in, and just being coddled by Al Haymon. And Al Haymon, he was throwing money at certain guys, but again, whole stable of fighters that he was not taking care of. You know what I'm saying? And it's just sad to see that these guys are in their position. They started off good. They started off with the red carpet treatment, but where are they today? Now Keith Thurman has to fight a giant just because he ran out of that many Pacquiao money, whatever else. Same with Jermell Charlo. You ran out of that Canelo money, and you were here trying to tell a guy like Terrence Crawford about his business and what he needs to do and everything else. And again, I know it's a cool thing to really get on these dudes, but again, it's just so sad to see this when you coddle these fighters and you appease them so much, and they get drunk, they're not disciplined, things like that. They throw away opportunities like Manny Pacquiao, like Errol Spence. who had to pull out of that fight. Keith Thurman, although he was way younger than Manny Pacquiao, you immortalize Manny Pacquiao more just because, again, Manny Pacquiao earned it from the mud more than you. You were given more stuff, and you couldn't even beat a Manny Pacquiao. You even got knocked down by old Manny Pacquiao, and Manny Pacquiao beat Thurman to a pulp for the most part. People give him credit because he threw output, but it was Manny that was, landing the hard, more damaging blows throughout the fight, and he even hurt him, I believe, in the 10th with a body shot, had Keith Thurman spitting out his mouthpiece and catching it, whatever else. And today these dudes, you can tell they're hurting on money, they're desperate. They care more for things about attention than they do keeping busy and just fighting and staying active and things like that. These dudes will go on long vacations. That's also Al Haymon's fault as well. But it's just sad to see these dudes. They weren't taught how to earn it the hard way, and a guy like, of course, the Floyd Mayweathers, Carl Froch, Terrence Crawford's, you know what I'm saying? They had to earn it from the mud, and these type of guys, they stayed in the gym. They took the sport seriously. They didn't do the drinking. They weren't here playing their flute, smoking weed like a hippie, like Keith Thurman and all these other dudes. They took themselves out of the race, even though they had all the advantages over guys like a Terrence Crawford or whatever else. And it's really just sad to see today. I don't like to see it. Jermell, I don't know what he was doing, keeping out of the sport for however many years, just spending your money, getting drunk. Him and his brother, they have substance abuse issues. I saw that Spence just came out today telling fighters that they shouldn't drink and things like that. Same story. Adrian Broner, we see where he's at. These are sad stories, man. These are very sad stories. And it just goes to show you, if you're going to go down the road of being a boxer, you got to take it seriously. Your business is actually your body, and you have to consider, like, let's use a rock star, for example, especially when they get older. They know that drinking and things can affect their voice, therefore affect them making money, so they finally start to slow down and calm down. But that's, a musician or rock star. You can't live like a rock star if you're a boxer. You understand? Bernard Hopkins was able to, and it's funny too, because Bernard was still challenging himself even in old age, fighting guys like Kovalev and whatever else, but these guys, they always took care of themselves, and they took this crap serious. And Bernard was I don't know if he was a felon, but he was an ex-convict, and he used boxing as an opportunity to make it in life. They just don't teach these type of lessons anymore in boxing. And now you got these dudes, they weren't put in a real situation where, consequences initially did not affect them. They could do whatever they want, say whatever they want, fight whoever they want. This dude was even telling old boy, they were blacklisting all kinds of fighters, man. Any kind of threat, these dudes were blacklisted, and they just want easy paydays. Come in there, get your check, and then go right back out. This is how they've been groomed to be. Keith Thurman, Spence's, Charlos, they've all sat out for long times and still get to hold their belts. You know what I'm saying? Consequences, from their perspective, did not have any effect on their lives. But today they see the consequences of their actions and their choices. Keith Thurman, maybe he should still try to get a Spence fight. I think he's going to lose to Sebastian Formella. I think Sebastian's just going to put it on him. Keith Thurman, again, he's always been somewhat of a front runner. He can give you about good 6 rounds of good fighting, but, just like in that Manny fight, he was blown out the first 1 to about 6. Even by his own words, he said, "What round is it?" And his trainer told him it's round 7. And that's when he really woke up and finally started going to it. But first 6, 7 rounds, you pretty much lost all those rounds. And then Manny was still able to beat you like in rounds 10. I think he had the better case in the championship rounds, but this is what happens when you are coddled. You know what I'm saying? And again, they were sitting here talking about WB no and all this other stuff. You're on the wrong side of the street. I wonder how these guys feel today, especially like a guy like Spence. Him and Derek James were always talking about getting the Canelo fight, even more so than the Crawford fight. it lets you know that their goal was always to just cash out for the most part. And a guy like Spence himself would tell you things like belts don't feed my kids and things like that. It goes back again. I know Floyd Mayweather gets a lot of hate, but a lot of you don't know anything about Floyd's career. I've mentioned this before in past videos where Floyd, he was accepting fights for like $3,000 just to stay busy, just to get his name out there, things like that. You know, he was also going to WWE and Dancing with the Stars. Floyd not only was a hard worker in the ring, but he was a hard worker outside the ring. And a lot of these fighters today, they don't know how way more easier it is today for them to get publicity and get favoritism and get these big paydays that they really don't deserve or garner. This is another problem with boxing. They just throw away money today. Again, this goes back to the money laundering aspect of what boxing has become. You lie to investors and you get them to throw all this money. Guys on the higher up positions are just pocketing a lot of the money. You know what I'm saying? And then they're just throwing dudes in a venue, and these fights, they don't really sell on pay-per-view, and nobody's really getting their value today. Jermell, again, I know he called out Spence earlier too. That would still be a good fight to make. You know, these guys, they just got to get active, especially at this point in their career, especially if they have kids and if they have families. At this point, it's just about being able to take care of your kids and, you know, your families for the most part. You guys had these opportunities. They were available to you. You guys rejected them. You didn't want nothing to do with them. You know, we've seen this story play out plenty of times, especially in this era of boxing, and it really is just a sad thing to see. I'm just here babbling right now, but that's all I really got to say about it right now. If you guys are raising children, tough love is better than pampering and coddling your child, okay? The world is going to be harsh to them when they grow up, and they're going to realize that it's not a fairy tale that they were told, you know, when they were young. It is going to become a harsh reality. You know, these guys had every opportunity to stay active and to just stack money. This is what a Terrence Crawford did. This is what a Floyd Mayweather did, guys. You know, if Floyd couldn't get his way, you know, he go and he make a way for himself. Like I said, again, if this requires him to, you know, go to WWE, he was P.T. Barnum of boxing for the most part, you know. He not only was a hard worker, very skilled, talented fighter, but he was also a good seller. And these guys today, you know, they don't really do nothing today. They're just entitled. And now the reality is finally starting to catch up to them. You know what I'm saying? And that's all I really got to say for now. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.